Ready for being on time? Clock. It is exactly 4, which does not jive with the one on the wall. So somebody must have changed for daylight savings time and gotten a little aggressive there, which happens in my car and happens everywhere that I have to touch something. So thank you for being on time. Really appreciate it. I am going to get us an on-time departure today because we do have a lot to cover, and particularly the traffic. I am expecting that to take quite a bit of time, so we don't want to shortchange some of our other items, but we want to get to everything. So as is our custom, we do introductions, including members of the audience, should you wish to introduce yourself and what neighborhood you're from. All of our community advisory panel members will do so, and same with the technical team and staff. So my name's Eileen Goodwin. I am the meeting facilitator. I'm also the meeting documenter. So I really appreciate when you all wait to be called on and you speak one at a time, because it makes my job so much easier. So you have been a great group to be working with, and just want to let everyone know in the audience, we will have a couple of opportunities for you to weigh in. I've already had one person ask a question that is agendized, so we'll get to that. And I will, make some opportunities to get clarity from the audience as well as from the CAP members, but I'll always start with the CAP team. So with that, Millette?
Millette Litzinger, AECom.
Ed Chicana, City of Palo Alto.
Chris Logan in South Palo Alto.
Don't forget your.
Oh yeah, make your thingies go on, everybody.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, this is bad.
You're taped.
Chris Logan in South Palo Alto.
Carrie Hodgson, South Palo Alto. Chantel Cotton Gaines, City Manager's Office.
Wayne Tonda, Consultant, City of Palo Alto.
Philip Burton, Midtown South.
Nadia Nayak, Old Palo Alto.
Tony Carrasco, Palo Alto.
Megan Kahn, University South.
Dave Shen, Old Palo Alto.
Patricia Lau, Altar Walk, which is in South Palo Alto also.
Mandar Borkar, South Palo Alto.
Peter DiStefano with AECom.
Ellie Wong, AECom.
Hey, I'm Greg Braille. According to the parking people, I live in Crescent Park, which means don't go to the one that says go here.
Hey Greg, can I ask you to sit next to Mandor and Peter, you guys switch, because that way I can see you a little better, and Peter can send me some smoke signals if he ever needs to talk. So thank you for that. That's very helpful. Okay, the audience.
One more.
Oh,
Eddie McCurry with
oh,
AECom.
sorry. Now I won't get my invoice paid. Nyan.
Nayan Amin with TJKM.
Jason Matlock, North of Palo Alto.
Welcome again.
Jim Lightbody with AECom. Tom Kellerman, I'm the University South.
Barbara Hazel, property owner of Professorville and downtown.
Stuart Hanson, Duvernay.
Gary Lindgren, Addison School.
Great. And Ruta?
Ruta Jaliwala with TJKM.
Great, she's our traffic speaker today along with Nyan. So let me review our agenda, and then we'll start in as our custom to the community conversations. So we'll start with the community conversation. This is the point in the agenda where our community members report out on what they might be hearing, or any meetings that they've held and kind of what's going on, the ears to the ground. It's been a very helpful item. Then we have had a request from the community, we talked about this last month, to make the emails that people are sending into the website transparent, and I'm going to ask Chantel to do an update on that, so I'm warning her on that. Then we have a new item, number C. This is a fun interactive exercise today where we're going to put you a little bit to work. After we give all of this material, we're going to actually ask you to do a private vote on what you would do as CAP members, how you would advise the project team on the various alternatives that are still on the table. And then it's my goal to get this done. Probably we'll do the vote before we do the community meeting agenda, and then that'll give, I'm gonna probably have Peter or somebody fast be able to tally up the votes and then give me the results, but we're not really discussing it. It's more of an opportunity for you all to be able to say what you think, and I know you talk and we talk together and apart, but we wanted to create an opportunity for you to give raw feedback to us. It's my goal that we would be able to, with about a dozen of you, be able to say, well, 8 people voted this way and 3 voted that way and 1 person didn't vote, or however. So you'll have a sense of the temperature, but we'll be doing that towards the end of the meeting. And I know in particular, the city staff is very curious about where we have landed today. And just a reminder, and you've probably noticed under summary of action items and then adjourn and thank you, because today is our last scheduled meeting. And I don't know if Ed wants to speak to that, because I have had some questions from the CAP members about, hey, is this it? And we feel like, as a project team, how invaluable you've been to us, but we also don't want to overstay our welcome. And this is the end of, this tranche of work. And so I think it's up to the city to decide the next steps, et cetera.
Sure, I'd be happy to comment. Also want to reinforce the thank you to everyone who's put in the effort to this point. I don't know if we're running a pool yet on whether this is actually your last CAP meeting. I would be more than happy to put a little money in on that one because I think we'll be getting together again. The council will be, actually, the council in the form of the Rail Committee of the Whole will be doing a check-in this coming Monday, and part of that is some discussion of what they see as where we are and the time frame for the path ahead, and I'll use the context of getting to a preferred alternative. And ultimately it's preferred alternatives as we look at individual crossings that we've been looking at over the last many months. So again, on Monday we'll have some discussion of that, but it is a committee discussion. We do expect to be coming back in early or mid-April with a contract amendment for the consultant team. So as a part of what happens today, leading to Monday, leading in fact to the community meeting that happens at the end of the month, all come back to the council in April for the purpose of confirming what our next steps are. As I said, I am willing to bet that we will ask you to come back again, at least for one more meeting, but I suspect it may be more than that. But again, we'll know better as of Monday night.
Thank you. And of course, we can't presuppose the council decision, so this could be our last meeting, in case. So I know that would be heartbreaking for everyone.
We should check a straw poll on that one. Anyone who thinks this will be your last meeting? Who wants it to be your last meeting? That's a little different question.
Yes. Yeah. If you want to be taken off, that might be something also you want to have a private conversation with Ed or our team. If you would like to say, hey, it's changed, or the thing I'm most interested in is already resolved, or whatever. We don't want to, torture you because you all submitted for a certain time frame and we have exceeded that. You've been very, very generous with your time. So how many of you have community updates under the community conversations? All right, anybody on this side? Chris, Gary, okay, Phil, Nadia?
So I have several. So one, maybe you can talk a little bit more also about the meetings we've had. But Tony and I met with the representatives of the business community.
Mm-hmm.
So met with one of the largest downtown property owners and then two other very important property owners, and got a lot of feedback from them in terms of how they were feeling about this process. I think the biggest thing that we heard back is they feel very excluded from this process. They were very frustrated, but they also were reticent to participate in anything if they were just going to be asked to check the box on things. So that was sort of interesting. They were really, really concerned about the closure of Palo Alto Avenue and how that might impact things. Of course, they didn't like the idea that there was even discussion of a potential business tax, since they are business owners, to pay for things. But just overall, that they thought that if the downtown coordinated area plan was going to be the way that we're going, that they really wanted to have the transportation discussion taken out of some of the land use conversation, because they thought that the upzoning and whatever could be really contentious, and that it might be easier to solve some of the transportation issues more directly. So that was super interesting. Second big sort of meeting was that Pat Lau was able to organize a meeting that we had with Supervisor Cindy Chavez. Dave Shen and I and former Mayor Pat Burt also attended. Pat had already met with Supervisor Chavez to talk about kind of safety and the need for grade separations from a safety perspective. But Supervisor Chavez is part of a subcommittee working with Supervisor Simidian on the Stanford expansion. And one of the topics is, what is Stanford's role in helping to fund the grade separation, since they share our stations and they share our borders, and kind of what happens there. So she was very receptive to kind of understanding that, yes, they think that there's some role for Stanford to play. That will all be negotiated in the development agreement that they're doing with Stanford, but she totally understood the need. We also talked about how difficult it is to do grade separations and how hard it is for each city to be inventing their own versions of grade separations. And she proceeded to talk about using the concept that was of creating some kind of entity that would oversee constructing the 41 grade separations all at the same time. So I then explained to her about the presentation that our city manager was able to set up with the Alameda Corridor East project, which happened like, I don't know, 2 years ago, almost at this point, where they came and talked about an authority that basically took control of helping multiple cities negotiate all at one time and oversee that entire construction process. She seemed very interested in that, so we sent her some more information. And then I would say, lastly, the kind of community conversation I'm hearing is, as more people are focused on traffic studies and traffic generally, I did hear that, as we talked about, when you build a new grade separation, you induce traffic. So there was a concern that at both Meadow and Charleston, the reason we have so many lanes as you are on the west side of the tracks, as you're waiting to get across the tracks and turn onto Alma, is really because we stack the cars, because actually once you cross to the other side of the tracks, it actually narrows back down to a single lane. And so there was concern of, in the hybrid alternatives, and actually all the alternatives where we looked at keeping the road the same width the entire way across, we might inadvertently induce a lot more traffic than we mean to, because now going forward, we wouldn't have to wait at the traffic light anymore, and so you wouldn't need to stack as much, and so you might actually cause more of an issue. So there was a question about, could we reduce that down to ensure that we're getting flow, but we're not inadvertently having a lot more throughput at those two crossings. I thought that was a really interesting.
And Ruta,
thing that
can
we
you
hadn't
speak to that
considered.
when your item comes up? Not right now, but can you put a note to cover something along those lines of whether you guys have looked at that? That'd be helpful.
Yeah, are they looking at Meadow and Charleston? I thought it's only Churchill.
Well, just in general, this sort of a traffic
Yeah.
influence.
And some discussion around that also went to the fact that as residents, everybody seems really interested in how you turn on and off of Alma. And what someone noticed, which I thought was interesting, is that, so let me use, if I'm at Chef Chu's and I'm trying to get to downtown Palo Alto, I spend most of my drive trying to figure out how to get into Alma. Do I get on at Meadow? Do I get on at Charleston? Am I going to take Page Mill? But mostly because everyone's trying to get off of El Camino. So the discussion was around, in some ways, everybody likes Alma because it's fast and there's no lights. But if we're thinking long-term, should we actually be thinking about making better use of El Camino and the throughput that's available, because it's actually kind of a very underutilized corridor right now, and then using Alma more for the residents instead of commuters, right? Commuters should probably be on El Camino. Those of us who need to get to the neighborhoods might prefer to take Alma. So those were kind of just the general kind of high-level topics that have bubbled up for me.
So your business people, are they also residents? I mean, could they
Yes.
have applied to this and they didn't? Or did you get
so-
any sense of?
Well, we discussed the possibility of so when we talked about the business license tax, they didn't like that. And of course, since it's my whole thing as well, then be part of the solution. So we also talked about Stanford's role, and they were like, well, you can't make Stanford pay. I was like, well, here's the thing. Either Stanford pays or the business pays, or we all link arms together and we go ask for money at Sacramento, which they were interested in. But the biggest thing that they all agreed is that they really do want to find a solution where business and the residents and the city and the consultants and everybody kind of works together. They're not excited about being on a committee if it's just going to be check the box, I'm a business person, I sat at that meeting. And so I don't know what that means, but that the biggest thing was that they do want to participate, but in a meaningful way. And they feel like when even the discussion of closing Palo Alto Avenue kind of happened, that they were just not at all at the table. And I believe the cap was only allowed for neighborhood people. There wasn't business, like there isn't
Well, but
a
I mean, they
business
could have been
category.
on as their neighborhood too and said they have this other skill set and network.
Possibly,
So,
yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking back to our process would have allowed that, and they probably would have gotten points for that, quite frankly. So,
Probably.
So
I don't
that
think
might be
I just think they didn't know. I mean,
curious.
honestly, they looked at me like, we're doing what? So, I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of it is really, I continue to, I presented today to Leadership Palo Alto. People just don't know what this is. They just don't. And so that's really the biggest challenge, I think.
great, thank you. Tony, I think has hand up, then we'll go to Megan. I'm just going to go down the row.
I did this with Nadia. I just wanted to repeat two things. The first one is that the issue of closing Palo Alto Avenue has a lot of opposition. The other issue is the separation of the traffic issues and the Caltrain issues from land use, because land use in Palo Alto takes a very long time, 3 to 5 years. Is that and a lot of people, including me, believe that this separation will free up understanding how the train will pass through. the issues about cost and who pays must be a guiding issue in which alternative we choose. For instance, if the undergrounding, I mean, the tunnel costs $3 billion, that's a quarter of the general fund in debt service, which is totally impossible. So why are we talking about it? So it's those kinds of costs and who pays issues that should guide the choosing of alternatives.
Great. And we do have more financial information coming in item 3. Great, thanks. Hey, Megan.
Hi, I did have a response to the Chamber of Commerce. I didn't know that, you had connections there. I did get an email from someone for someone at the Chamber of Commerce, and I did email them like back in November, December, and did not hear back. So I'm not sure whom that was, but, and I also did a couple of community meetings with Downtown North, so I'm not sure what the breakdown was there, but hopefully we can do better in the future.
So I'm actually, it's probably, well, the chamber's run by Judy Kleinberg, and I was supposed to present yesterday, but got bumped to next month, so that, and hopefully if we have a future CAP meeting, I can give you an update on how that went, but that is the goal, is to kind of get to them. And I would say, even though a lot of them are business owners or residents, I think that they get their information from more businessy networks and not neighborhood lists, and so I think that's kind of why we're missing that bucket. And so I've now kind of tapped into the one thing that the business people highlighted is there's a difference between the business people who are the lessees of the property and the actual owners of the land. And that's a much smaller and very different group who's a lot more private and not necessarily going to be at public meetings.
Right.
So that's kind of something that we have to work with.
So just another data point for you all, because, you are hearing these things, and I'm trying to make sure you have accurate information to be able to push back a little bit on some of the complaining, quite frankly. And I want to put a point on with Chantel. When we sent out our community-wide postcards, was the business addresses, they were included, correct? I think they were. I think we talked specifically about that. So that should have captured some of our tenants, may not have been all business owners, but I thought we talked about owners for the businesses as well. I remember we talked about that in planning department, creating some of that because of that exact topic that you're talking about. But we can always have more feedback, and this is great feedback for your next phases.
My
Okay.
final comment
Yep,
was
Megan.
that we really appreciated getting the traffic study early, so thank you for that. But folks were wondering what the timeline is for the second half, sort of the modeling and all of that, and where that fits into the general timeline for the project. I think that was a concern.
Okay, we'll get Ruta to cover that also in her agenda item, which is number 4. David?
Okay, 3 quick points. First, to follow up on Nadia's and our meeting with County Supervisor Chavez. I was a little bit taken aback when I guess there's a Stanford Gup rally tomorrow night here at City Hall, and I was on an email list that got sent out this 3-pager that said basically these are the things that the supervisors are looking at with respect to the Gup, and I was shocked to actually see nothing mentioned about grade separation in there. So either we need to show up at this rally tomorrow, or we need to do something else. But yeah, and hopefully I'm.
Yeah, you need armbands and
Yeah,
stuff.
I think there's going to be a lot of sign waving and the press here tomorrow. I also stuck the community meeting in the Palo Alto Unified e-news, so hopefully we'll
thank
get a
you.
lot of people there.
Yay.
And then I emailed out a lot of the notes from our last CAP meeting, and I think there's a lot of reaction to the tunnel and its potential for eminent domain. So we may see a lot of movement to the committee of the whole meeting happening next Monday
interesting.
at 8:30
Interesting.
about
Okay.
that.
Yep, good to know, thank you.
From Gup to Committee of the Whole, huh?
Yep.
All right, Pat.
Okay, well, I missed the last meeting, so I didn't really give you an overview on my first meeting with Supervisor Chavez. She has a very strong interest in suicide prevention and injuries and fatalities in and around the corridor. So I was very surprised at her interest, and so we had a lengthy conversation about the different means restriction efforts and what I had done with the City of Palo Alto with Project Safety Net, and how we should go forward with some of the priorities, whether it be the fencing on the west side, the IDS system, the cameras, and different types of prevention efforts, suicide prevention, for example, for those folks who have an attempt in and around the corridor. So we had a good discussion, and I requested a follow-up meeting, and that is when we came together on March 5th. And as Dave and Nadia and former Mayor Pat Burt discussed issues related to the Stanford GUP and the community benefit, and I focused on the data that Greg provided. Great. And so the web accident prediction system, there was a lot of attention given to the corridor as well as the crossings, and some of the most, we're not supposed to say it in terms of danger, not most dangerous, but had a high risk, let's say, for accidents, and these are collisions with vehicles. I have focused on injuries and fatalities with pedestrians, and that's a very different type of data and collected in a different way. And so I also gave her the information from the FRA, which actually states that trespassing along railroad right-of-ways is the leading cause of death. And so she is well informed as far as injuries and fatalities and what our concerns are for our crossings. And I think she too has a concern about cost and what is really feasible. And she is trying to put together what is known as perhaps an authority, a group of, I'm not certain if it's policymakers, constituents, stakeholders, but people who could provide input for how the money is spent. And so it would be a coordinated, comprehensive effort. And so it was a good meeting, and we hope to meet with her again.
Great, thank you. Amanda?
So I sent out 2 emails for the 2 meetings, I guess one on the 18th, the council meeting, and the second one
27th.
Second one on the 27th. The feedback that I did get was, so the council meeting is at 8:30, right? It's not any earlier. The background to it is a lot of elderly folks are very interested in attending these meetings, and 8:30 is a bit late, and they usually go even further late in the day. So that's something to consider next time around. And then second is the South Palo Alto tunnel is definitely in that discussion this time around. Is that correct? Because this has happened multiple times, and then we talk about deciding to discuss it for the next time.
So just for clarification, the item in front of the Committee of the Whole on Monday evening is simply an update and schedule. So it's not really specifically on different alternatives, but it's likely that in the context of discussing schedule, they'll be talking about them.
Because they want to have community input, right, at our community meeting
Exactly.
before they start.
Ed, quick question.
Phil?
Are you saying that there won't be any decisions taken on which alternatives will be accepted or rejected at the next council meeting?
And this will sound bureaucratic, only because it is, but Monday, there is a council meeting to be followed by a separate meeting called the Rail Committee of the Whole. And it's really at that second meeting that they'll be talking about this topic. And there is a possibility that the committee could make this is really almost amusing, make a recommendation to themselves as the council, but that won't, the second part, any action taken would not happen Monday night. It would need
They
to
would
be
have to get
agendized and come
agendized,
back.
right?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm trying to decide if I can even attend or not. I have an early morning flight the next
So
day.
can I get
What
a
time would that be
clarification?
at?
Yeah, let's get clarity on the time. Is it 8:30? Will
Well,
it be
it
before
will,
that?
it will be at the conclusion of the council meeting.
And I've been to some late meetings with your council.
Yes,
So do you
yes.
have exciting items prior to this?
Not really. So
Okay, so it could
sea level rise, a small item, 8:15,
8:15? 8-ish?
scheduled time.
Okay,
So does that help?
So can I get a clarification on the agenda? I thought at least the understanding was whether to decide to pay for analysis of the South Palo Alto tunnel was to be decided. That's the decision they're going to make. Is that correct, or?
No, I don't think so. It's again, in the context of a discussion that will lead to another discussion.
And that decision would be April?
Yes.
So, Munda, I think what happens, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that they're having a conversation about the fact that they will need to extend the contract to further study the tunnel, but that contract has to come up on April 1st. It's not happening at that meeting. That doesn't mean that you couldn't give feedback at that meeting to say that absolutely should be part of the contract extension that would need to happen for the April meeting. So you can kind of speak early on the topic, but it's not that it's being decided on that night.
Correct.
You're influencing things potentially. Anything else before I go on to Greg? He's like, wow.
Influencing.
Influencing. All right, Greg, do you have anything?
The background to it is because we attended like last year, the last meeting of last year
Yep,
was,
that
we
one
expected
in
this
December.
was it, and then like one more and one more. So that's the background to it.
We feel your pain. Okay, Greg.
So, I see Stuart is here. He has as you know from last time, he has a specific proposal for a different alternative. And I struggled over the last few weeks about how to get him some input on that. We, the CAP, don't decide on these things. We don't propose proposals. You don't decide. You propose proposals. So I encouraged him to email the council. But other than saying, speak to individual council members, if anyone else has suggestions for someone who has an idea for a different design, how to get it in front of the people who'd make decisions, he'd appreciate that.
So, any thoughts, Ed? This sounds like an Ed thing.
Yeah.
And look, he ran away. Come back.
I'm just going to enjoy my snack out of the spotlight. Let's see. So the question is how best to introduce additional alternatives?
A
Yeah.
community-based alternative
Yeah.
that really, this group doesn't vote, they don't make recommendations to council as a group.
Yep.
And it's not coming from your consultant team. So the question that Greg's posing on behalf of the community member who's presented this alternative to this group is, what's the best mechanism for him to get this in front of the council?
Okay, so which
To-
alternative is this?
This is the,
This
it's
is
the one
his-
with the
he'd be happy-
at-grade that we had last time.
When
You
we get to
weren't, I
community
think-
time, he'd be happy
Yeah.
to share it again, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's another alternative, got written up, we viewed it last time. It's basically a variation on an at-grade with some additional walls and things. So is that something that would be in a two-minute
I mean, certainly the
two-minute drill in the? but it's
presented to the
agenda?
committee as a whole. Yes,
Yeah.
Monday night would be the next opportunity to do that.
So he's
Yeah.
here, so
So sign up.
let him, give him a chance. Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
And my second thing is, I did find the web accident prediction system from the FRA because there was a big accident in Long Island, and a number of people were killed. And the New York Times was writing all these articles about how this was one of the most dangerous rail crossings in the country. It was not even close, actually. The FRA predicts how they have an accident prediction value. They base on accident history as well as traffic, train speed, number of cars. And on that list, Charleston Road is the 8th most likely intersection to have an intersection in the country, and the second on the Caltrain system. And other rail crossings with these kinds of high chance of collision, the chance they predict is 0.45, which means there's about a 50% chance of an accident in a given year. 6 people have been killed at Charleston Avenue in the last 10 years, 4 pedestrians and 2 cars. 2 people have been killed at Churchill as well in the last 10 years, 1 pedestrian and 1 car. So, this is real bad stuff, and I think that, to start with, the state government is doing nothing for Caltrain. They are funding grade separation projects in other part of the state, but because Caltrain is not one of the major rail carriers, it doesn't seem to be on their radar. The federal government's not helping, but it seems like when people give us the "I don't even know why we're doing this" response, which is I think what we get a lot around town when we speak to people who don't live right near the tracks, we need to be able to say, well, one of the reasons is that these are extremely dangerous. Charleston Meadow is number 12. These are extremely dangerous rail crossings by any measure in the whole country. And that was my reaction when I moved here from New Jersey. It's like, oh my God, you got 4 lanes of traffic and 80-mile-an-hour trains crossing every day, 94 times a day. I mean, that's very, very dangerous. So just, sorry, not community input, just my own opinion.
that's fantastic.
But it's important, and I brought copies, and I'm going to send them to the council.
Could we include that in the presentation? So when we talk about the need for grade separations, and we talked about before, like explaining the gate time down, it might be useful. Caltrain has a diagram that they use that shows like how how the companies along the corridor are what percentage of the GDP and kind of like why this is an important corridor. But if we could highlight, I mean, what I read is that there's 10,000 crossings, at-grade crossings in the state of California. And so to be number 8 and number 10 or number 8 and number 12 in all of the United States means we're important.
Yeah.
Not news for Palo Altans, but
No, that's great, and great research.
we know we're special. But I mean, really, like, and so I think that would be helpful, to Greg's point, to include that as a regular thing in the conversation as we talk about safety.
Okay, great. All right, anybody else before we move on?
I just want to add that with increased train frequency, it'll get much worse because people will be tempted more and more to go around the gates, which is why the Long Island Railroad accident happened. The gates work, they're allowed to work.
Great. Okay, Chantel, you're on for updating folks where to find the list of emails on the website if somebody has written into our website, the city website.
Very short update that I have to upload them still, and I will do so before the council meeting, and have it probably as an at places upload, which is what the clerk's office normally does. So I'll try to get them the last couple of months so that that's there, and then we can link to that.
What does that mean for those of us who aren't as familiar with
Oh,
your website?
good point.
Like, where would they find it on the website?
So I'm going to ask the city clerk to put it with the council agenda packet, which is what they usually do for emails received before the meeting. And then
Okay.
I'll also find that link, and then we can put that on the Connecting Palo Alto webpage.
Thank
But I
you.
will send you guys the link regardless of where it ends up.
Okay, so we'll update with the board packet for Monday, and then we'll link it to the site after that.
I did want to point out to fellow CAP members, so Eileen and her team do meeting notes from these CAP meetings, and you may not have noticed, because it took me a few months to notice, that those meeting notes capture kind of what we say, but then also has a column where the city answers back some of the questions that we kind of ask out loud philosophically.
Yep.
So if you've ever wondered what the answers to those questions are, I would refer you to those meeting notes because I found them illuminating, and I was like, oh, look, there's an answer in here that I didn't know about.
And
So-
somebody read them.
and so, yes, so I would just like to point out, guess what? We've been given answers we didn't even know. So go check out the webpage.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, and then I already told you about the poll, so that's our new item there in between 6 and 7 and 7 and 8. So we do have Paul, he's here. Right there, you're on, you're on. Yeah, get up and get going.
How do I do this? Do I come up and
I think you could do that because we need you to be on the mic.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Or you can take Peter's place.
Or you can take Peter's place. No, I like you being the professor, that's good.
All right, I'm good with that.
Control your slides, page
Boy.
Or you want me to do it?
No, I got it. I can do it. I think I can do both. Okay, let's see here.
Oh, we did that.
Okay, good. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Penninger, and I am an economist, dismal profession and all that. I work for AECOM, and I've been looking the past few months at different kind of high-level financing alternatives for the grade separation projects here in Palo Alto. And coming out of the last community meeting and at the direction of the CAP and city staff, we were asked to do a little bit of additional research on top of what we've already done, which has been quite a bit, on some specific ideas around gross receipts taxes that would be assessed on employers, and then per employee taxes, and then finally to look at a couple of comparable grade separation projects in nearby cities to provide some context on what other sources similar cities have used to fund their grade separation projects. So I have about 5 to 7 minutes of presentation, and then I'll take questions. So first of all, there was a lot of interest at the last community meeting on the idea of a gross receipts tax and how gross receipts taxes have been used, particularly in San Francisco, to fund public services and infrastructure. And for those of you who don't know what a gross receipts tax is, it refers to the amount of money received from doing business in a particular jurisdiction. In this case, we're going to look at San Francisco. That can include amounts derived from sales, services, dealings in property, interest, rent, royalties, dividends, licensing fees, other fees, commissions, and distributed amounts from business entities. And one of the ideas about a gross receipts tax as opposed to a payroll tax is that it's more progressive and that has a lower impact on small businesses. So in San Francisco, in 2014, a gross receipts tax was adopted through Proposition E, which is a voter proposition. And this replaced the city's former business taxation scheme, which was a payroll tax. So even though it raises about $800 million annually, and you can see some of the details on this slide, which, as Nadia mentioned, will be posted on the city's website, it's really revenue neutral. It's really replacing the city's former payroll tax. It doesn't generate more revenue than that, but it does do it in what is a more progressive way, meaning that it has a higher impact on larger businesses and businesses with greater receipts. More recently, San Francisco passed a homeless services gross receipts tax. Now, keep in mind that this was a gross receipts tax that's funding services, including housing, mental health services, supportive services, and other related services, and so not necessarily infrastructure or capital expenditures. So it's a suite of services that are provided to the homeless. This is also called the Salesforce Homeless Initiative because it was supported very heavily by the founder of Salesforce, who promoted this idea. And it passed, and it's going to result in an additional $250 to $300 million annually for homeless services and housing in San Francisco, funded by an additional tax on top of the gross receipts tax that will be paid primarily by the city's largest employers and most profitable employers. So those are probably the two best known examples of gross receipts taxes in San Francisco. Obviously a much larger city, many more employers, but it's a style of tax which has been adopted by communities in different parts of this country to raise revenues for different purposes. Generally not a single purpose infrastructure item, but that's certainly something that you could innovate here. So the other kind of tax we were looking for was a per employee tax, and that's a tax which is also sometimes called a head count tax, where employers are taxed based on their number of employees, and usually a fee is assessed per employee over some certain amount of employees. So the most recent, and I'm sure, how many of you know about what's called the Google tax in Mountain View? Yeah, so this was a measure that was passed by the citizens of Mountain View last year called Measure P, which will assess a tax on employers in the city of Mountain View, and that is graduated according to the size of the business. So as you can see from this chart, or hopefully you can see if your glasses are better than mine, it's going to generate about $150 per employee for businesses over 5,000 people, which includes in Mountain View, Google. So $6 million a year will be generated, is estimated. They don't know, they haven't assessed it yet. It's being assessed this year for the first time. So they estimate that it will generate $6 million a year, of which $3.3 million would come from Google. Not yet adopted, but proposed. It's been discussed at the Cupertino City Council. They have not yet placed it on the ballot in 2020, but it has been discussed in the context of having it be a ballot initiative in 2020, is a similar per employee business tax that would be assessed on Cupertino's business community in the same way that Mountain View did for their businesses, and would yield kind of similar results, about $8 to $10 million annually, of which Apple would pay $7 to $9 million. So actually, in that case, at the proposed base rate of $500 per employee, it's $500 base rate plus $150 per employee. On top of that, Apple would be, with their large employment base in Cupertino, would be providing $7 to $9 million in additional taxes. So once again, these are not, it's not specified what these taxes are used for. They go into the city's general fund. The city council decides with city staff what the city's budget priorities are, and then those go to fund city's capital expenditure needs, operations and maintenance services, and other public services. So not a dedicated grade separation source necessarily, but these are types of taxes that have been used in other places. Other examples, and we did some more background research on these. They weren't quite as instructive, but we have that research which we provided. We looked at City of Sunnyvale, Redwood City, and San Jose. So city staff also asked us, which I thought was a really good question, and it's something that EPS a previous consultant looked at in their white paper from 2017, but we've now updated a bit, are examples of funding sources obtained or proposed for actual grade separation projects in the region. And we looked at 5 different projects. We looked at the only completed one that we were able to find was in San Bruno. We looked at a project that's under construction in San Mateo that Millette tells me is coming along just fine from your view on the Caltrain. Right, yeah, okay. And then projects in the planning stage, including Burlingame, Mountain View, and Menlo Park, all communities that face similar challenges to those faced by Palo Alto in terms of assembling a capital stack that you can use to build your grade separation projects in these very fiscally constrained times. For San Bruno, it was a much smaller project, I think, than what you're contemplating here. It was a project cost of $155 million, completed in 2014, of which most of the dedicated funding came from the San Mateo County Transportation Authority Measure A. Another $55.9 million came from state funds, Proposition 1B funds, and then finally there was a small federal amount of funding of $6.6 million. In San Mateo, which is the project that's under construction currently, it's a hybrid project in the nomenclature of this process. It's $180 million. It will be completed, assuming all goes according to plan, in 2020. And the capital that they were able to put together was also, once again, mainly state and regional, so high-speed rail, Proposition 1A, Caltrans CPUC Section 190 funds, San Mateo County Transportation Authority funds, and then finally a small amount of funds from the City of San Mateo's Transportation Impact Fee Program. That was the local source. Let me get through and then you can ask questions.
You only got a couple more slides.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
we'll open it.
yeah.
I'll do you first, David.
I'm going fast. So other cities that have been looking at this include Burlingame, Mountain View, Menlo Park, and in the main, they're looking at things like San Mateo County Measure A, Santa Clara County Measure B, which is relevant here, the Caltrans CPUC Section 190 funds, and then local sources like transportation impact fees and what we might call value capture approaches, is where you use either city land or land that could be upzoned in some way to generate additional real estate value that could be captured in some fashion by the local jurisdiction to fund infrastructure. Just some kind of general summary findings which build on much of what we've already talked about in this committee and at committee meetings, at previous committee meetings. Obviously, one of the reasons we're looking at financing is that federal funding has been very limited for projects completed or under construction. We're not anticipating that that's going to change. High-speed rail funds have been critical for projects completed or under construction, but this will likely be an unreliable source of funds in the future. So that's not a source that I would look to strongly in now for Palo Alto. Regional transportation measure funds have been and will continue to be a critical funding source for projects. I think that's particularly true here. Specifically sub-regional sources. And local funding sources such as transportation impact fees, value capture approaches, other types of fees assessed on employers have been explored, but have yet to make up a large contribution to actually completed or proposed projects. So that's, I think, where kind of we're going as a field, is looking for different ways that local communities can raise more money to support these projects, but thus far, we don't have any examples of completed or underway projects in which the local funding source makes up more than a very small percentage of the overall bucket of funding. Total projects that the projects we looked at, the other challenge to the comparative research is that Burlingame had one alternative that they were looking at, which was $960 million, and that's the biggest sort of chunk of money that we've seen being discussed related to grade separation on the peninsula. Their preferred alternative came in at around $250 million. So I believe that at least in the range of estimates that we've seen at this point, your grade separation projects would still kind of be at the very top end of what we're looking at in terms of capital costs. So you also have a total capital funding challenge that makes you a little bit outside of the on one end of the spectrum. But then again, you also have this very dangerous intersection. 8th in the country. Yeah, so that's the summary that I have for today, and I think I can take questions now.
Okay,
Yeah,
David's
okay.
starting, and then I see Megan, I see Nadia, I see Pat. We're going to have a few questions.
Just a quick question on The San Mateo project, do you know if that any eminent domain was done at that project at all, by any chance?
No. I mean,
Oh, you're asking whether it was done?
he's asking whether it was
Yeah.
done, yeah.
No, but, so remember that in San Mateo, that area was the Bay Meadows project? So that's the local transportation impact fee because it was part of that whole thing. So, well, there might have been, that whole area was getting redone anyway, and that necessitated some grade crossings. So we can, I'm sure.
I mean,
ask, but-
it would be Caltrans that would have to do the eminent domain taking, right?
It could be the city,
Really?
or it could be Caltrain.
Under what authority would they?
Caltrain would do it.
Caltrain could do it, or
Yeah,
Caltrans?
or the city could make it as part of the project, the bigger project with the Bay Meadows. So,
Yeah.
but they coordinated very closely with them, so my guess
Mm.
is that they just arranged things to not have to do that, but I do a lot of work there, we could check on that.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
All right, I think I had Megan and then Nadia.
I was wondering actually about this slide, total project costs for similar projects. By similar projects, do you mean, like,
Those ones.
I'm sorry, I guess what I'm wondering is how many streets are grade separated at the end of these projects? Are we talking 1? Are we talking 4?
Oh, we didn't get into it in that level of detail. I mean, I could find out pretty easily for you.
Do you know, Etienne probably has a good idea.
Burlingame was just Broadway. Mountain View is
Just Rangstorm.
Rengstorff. Menlo Park is up in the air. Menlo Park is
Well, no,
they just
decided,
adopted
so they're gonna do 3.
excuse me, which is Ravenswood, Oak Grove, and
Glenwood.
Glenwood. Sorry, thank you. Yes.
And I'm sure San Mateo had more than one.
And San Mateo, I believe, is 4.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
under construction, I believe. But
But they're really close together.
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
and they're
Three as a
and they're
whole.
rebuilds of the existing at-grade crossings. I think most of those. No, excuse me. I'm take that back. No, San Mateo was they're very close, but one is they're cul-de-sacing one, so.
It's 20.
20
Yeah, a lot of
Places
those were
and
T
six.
intersections to begin with, so they're a little
Okay.
easier to deal with than major streets like.
And San Bruno, I think, was 2.
Was it or 1?
I guess what I'm asking is if we could have a breakdown of that, like included, but what comparable means in the context of like our projects
Yeah, so we
and their
should do
projects
that
by
for the
like
community
amount of
meeting for sure.
streets now grade separated or closed or whatnot.
Yeah. And I think closed is a good point, because some of these did also, to get it done, they also chose to change the network. Maybe they weren't closed, they're gonna turn left on Castro, so you're not closed. What happens is you go down to that last block, becomes a bigger plaza, and you're forced left to go to Rangsdorf to go across.
But that's not free, is it? I mean.
Use your mic.
So the 120, I mean, there is some cost to actually closing that. It's not free. Okay, so that's part of their 120 million. Okay, thanks.
It's turning it into a big plaza. I mean, they're not just gonna throw some barricades up, it's part of a bigger plan.
Yellow caution tape,
Yeah,
okay.
now, Nadia.
So yeah, I think to your point, highlighting the fact that when we talk about the cost of the Meadow Charleston alternative, that's 2 intersections, right, versus the 1, right? So having that metric. I would say, Paul, it might be really helpful if, for a lot of the taxes that you highlighted, they have some low-income workers who don't have to pay the tax and some high-income workers that pay more. So if we could standardize across the cities what the average worker tax would be, that would be helpful.
Per employee headcount tax?
Yeah, just so that it's all the same metrics, right? Because that would be more, because in some cases, it's like, well, there's a 500 base fee in Cupertino plus 150 per each one. And so if we could count like average worker, and that includes the ones that are not paying anything and the ones that are paying more, what do we come out with?
It's by business revenues, not worker salaries.
Right, and so whatever we could standardize would be helpful. The other thing is, I didn't see anything, so East Palo Alto, my understanding is passed a square footage tax on development, on retail, and so it's like literally like for every square foot, it's like a nickel or something. I don't remember what the numbers are, don't quote me on any numbers.
I could tell you because I'm doing on Tuesday of next week. If you want to come see me live and in action, I'll be at the East Palo Alto City Council trying to get impact fees passed.
There you go, okay, so.
It's Measure HH.
Okay, and that was $500 per.
$250 per, well, anyway, go ahead. Say-
Yeah, so whatever that number would be, that would be interesting to understand,
Okay.
because I think the third category is you have gross receipts, you have per employee, but then you also have square footage, right? Which also has an implication about future development and kind of in our neck of the woods, whether it's office space or, private development, like what does that mean? And that would be super helpful to understand. I think that's all I have.
And I owe you a call.
Yes, I know, we'll get
Okay,
together.
Pat.
I have a question about an article that I read. It's consecutive articles about Facebook and the Dunbar Bridge Rail. Have you done any research on that and how they're trying to make, Mark Zuckerberg is trying to make a contribution regarding how that rail, the Dumbarton Rail, might be beneficial to his company and how he may provide funding? And it could be up to, I don't know, $1 million.
No, I work on that project
Okay.
too.
Yes, go ahead.
So, he,
Yeah, there's all these
so
different
he
articles.
has, it's not he, it's Facebook. And,
Facebook.
I mean, just to be clear, it's not
Right.
coming out of the Zuckerberg Foundation or his personal
Right,
checkbook.
right.
It is the company.
To benefit Facebook, correct?
Well, they have funded several big transportation projects in the county because they have a lot of employees in the county that they need to get to work and back. But their funding, for example, they have put into money on the Managed Lanes project up there, which is the 101 project to
Right.
change how that's done. They're actually paying into that. So that's a public-private partnership. And right now, they paid $1 million to do the study that if you go on the website and the Samtrans District website, you see that was funded by Facebook. And now the current process that's just kicking off is a partnership between Facebook and a company called Plenary Ventures, and they have formed something called Cross Bay Transit Partners. And so together, they're moving the project forward along with the land that the district already owns, which is the rail between Redwood City across the bay into Newark. And there isn't a project yet, there isn't a technology yet, but there is a website. So if you want to go out there, there's a bunch of materials on that.
Okay.
But they haven't capped any kind of contribution, but they're in a partnership and they have an exclusive negotiating agreement with the district. So they're doing their financial planning in the next 18 months or so, and there should be a plan, and then that'll all become public knowledge and information.
Did you say Plenary Ventures or Planetary Ventures?
Plenary.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
So they're an international firm. They do a lot of work in Canada and Australia and other places. So they have various things. They're doing a variety of technical infrastructure. And essentially the model is they front the money in the project and then they, take the risk, but then they get the fees. And then eventually the project, becomes, well, it is a public asset the whole time. It's publicly, the train would be available, whatever
To
it
everyone.
is, to everybody.
Right.
But of course, it would have clearly some nexus to all the employers that are along the line.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to put us on the next item soon. So does anybody else have anything else on this before we move on? Because traffic is going to suck up a lot of time. Gary?
Yeah, I got a question. San Carlos, they did their grade separation several years ago. How did they pay for that?
San Carlos.
Did we not include that?
It's quite old, though.
It's pretty old. I think it was sales tax stuff. From city money.
Yeah. It's probably this.
We can find out, put it in minutes.
I'm just guessing Home Depot, I think, they moved in there and I have an idea that they probably put some money into it.
I don't think they did.
I think it was sales tax measure.
I did want to point out, one of the things that Supervisor Chavez highlighted when she was talking about having an entity is that if you created some kind of authority, and if you guys are not familiar, on the PA Grade SEP website, under the Resources tab, there is a presentation by Alameda Corridor East. It was done a while ago. I'm happy to send out a video link so you can watch the live presentation. But basically what it is in Southern California, at the Port of Long Beach and at the Port of LA, they have lots of giant ships that arrive and unload containers. And so there's, don't quote me on numbers, but there's, let's say 20 cities where they have this grade crossing where it's freight trains, and when they have to wait for a train, it's like 9 minutes of waiting because of really long freight cars. And so what, down in Southern California, up here we have Metropolitan Transit Commission, so the 9 area counties under ABAG and stuff. Down south, they have what they call Council of Governments, and they were able to get all of their governments working together to be able to create an authority that then was in charge of building the grade separations across all those cities. And they figured out how to get funding, they worked with the businesses, they worked with the residents. And so that is one of the things that I pointed out to Supervisor Chavez, and she was interested in the idea of having, if you have an entity where tax money could go into, so let's say if Stanford had to pony up money, it could go into that fund. Maybe Measure B money gets put into that fund. Because what's happened historically is that every county raises money under their different sales tax measures, and they're not at the same time. And at this rate, like if we're all fighting for who gets the worst grade separation, it's hard. And so it would help to have a unified strategy.
Yeah, that's,
Well,
that's
issue-
definitely a best practice.
Yep, and we had one here in Santa Clara County called the Traffic Authority that built Route 85, took the stoplights off 237 and widened 101. So, that did exist as a separate entity with a 5-member board, and
Back
so-
to the future. I mean, you know, definitely like, and also in terms of thinking about how major employers who are affected by our crumbling infrastructure can contribute to these types of projects. Something like a JPA or some sort of other structure that's broader across jurisdictional boundaries is very.
And of course, that's TJPA in
Right.
San Francisco. It's probably going to become Diridon, similar something. So anyway, Andor, and then I am going to move us to traffic because I know you guys really need to get onto that
Were
one.
all these hybrids?
Good question. I think they are.
Yeah.
Yes.
San
I think-
Bruno's.
Yeah.
Burlingame was a hybrid, Menlo Park is a hybrid, and I believe Mountain View is a hybrid.
Well, Mountain View's a closed street and an overcrossing that
But
exists.
it's raising the track and lowering the road.
Mhm.
So. San Bruno as well.
Yep.
And San Carlos.
No tunnels.
And Burlingame is the most dangerous one, like the #1 in California, the ones that were behind. That's
Is
who
it
they're-
really?
It,
Wow.
well, so, because, no, it's
Number
number
two.
1 in California because the number one that was down in Southern California has been built.
Yep.
So
And the
they.
former #2, I worked on it, was in Richmond, and it's been built. So, I mean, the good news is those do attract federal funds and state funds, CPUC funds, et cetera. So it does, thank you for your research, that's really helpful. Any last words before we let the traffic people come up? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're excused, and we've got Ruta doing the presentation today, but Nyan and Ruta are available for Q&A. And, of course, I'm gonna ask you to be thorough, but be brief.
I'll try. I know there's a lot to cover, and I'm going to kind of quickly go through it, but we will be definitely available towards the end of the meeting if you want to ask any questions and grill me more.
They'll stay after, because we do want to cover everything else.
Yeah. So today's intention is, yes, we have done all the data collection, we have submitted the existing conditions report, but today we want to really talk about the intersections that have been impacted due to this closure, that we have seen that will be impacted in 2030, and what are the mitigation measures that we are proposing for those impacted intersections.
And just, I know I'm delaying you, but I just want to remind everybody that the mitigations are really important because we have gotten many requests to just close down things and see what happens. And I think Ed and the others in the city staff have said, we would never choose to do that. You would always put your mitigations in first and be strategic. Then when you close things down, hopefully things aren't so bad. And so I think we want to make sure you understand the potential mitigations because they would go prior. So when you close, you have those in place and hopefully traffic runs fairly smoothly.
Yeah, that's correct. So this particular slide kind of indicates that all the numbers that we have in red text are the numbers that need to be diverted due to the closure of Churchill. We are looking at approximately 700 to 750 vehicles to be diverted during the peak hour. And just wanted to point out that even today at this particular intersection, we do not allow through movement from 7:45 to 8:30. So it's kind of going to be a same situation, but over the 24 hours. Trip distribution, this is basically based on the Palo Alto travel demand model as well as the OND data that we had collected. And as you can see, that the maximum traffic will be diverted to Embarcadero, Oregon Expressway, as well as Emerson Road. And again, if you want to look into it into more detail or talk about it, I'm available to talk about it after the meeting.
Question, point of clarification. Are you saying that the traffic is that just the through traffic or also the turn traffic?
Also the turn traffic.
Okay.
Yeah. So based on the analysis that we did, we do look into this 8 intersections to be impacted. And when I mean impacted, it means that the level of service is at an unacceptable level of service today as well as in the year 2030. When we started looking at the proposed mitigations that could kind of be implemented at these intersections, we thought that the intersection number 3, 4, and 8 need to go together because they are very, very closely spaced, and whatever we mitigate on one intersection would not just work by itself. So it would be a good idea to mitigate all 3 of them together as a group. The next 3 intersections are CMP intersections, and the level of service criteria for those are level of service E, to consider that it is working at an acceptable level of service. And the other 2 that we're going to talk about is Alma Street and Oregon, and intersection number 15, which is Embarcadero and Cooper. Just a graphic to kind of show you what are the locations of these intersections that we are talking about. And as you can see, 3, 4, and 8 are really, really closely spaced. So whatever we do at one, it is going to impact at the other 2. Talking about intersection number 3, 4, and 8, here are just the existing controls that we have at these intersections, as well as the existing turning movements that are going to be rerouted. So the ones that are in red, we are deducting from that intersection, so they won't be showing up at that intersection. The ones that are shown in green is the traffic that we are going to add at that intersection. And it shows the numbers for existing, plus project means with the closure, and year 2030 plus project. So when we evaluated these intersections, we know even today, these intersections do not operate at an acceptable level of service. They do operate at level of service F. But when we take this further and use, like, close Churchill, then we would see that there would be a little bit more traffic diverting, which would make it even worse than what we have today. So we need to mitigate them. And the reason why these intersections are experiencing that high delay is because of the westbound left turns. It's your through movement is so heavy that you do not get enough chance to make that turn and merge into the traffic, and that's where the delay is caused. And then when you look at the entire intersection, you see that the intersection is not operating at an acceptable level of service. We also ran the traffic signal warrants, and they do meet at the intersection of Alma and Kingsley. So with that said, what we are proposing as mitigation is that we would like to propose Lincoln Avenue to be right in, right out only. Move that traffic which wants to make the left turn onto the intersection of Alma and Embarcadero, and signalize both the intersections, Alma Embarcadero and Alma Kingsley. That way they work as one single group, and that could be done just by having one single controller, but 2 intersections working together. If we do implement that, as you can see, existing, the level of service is F. Year 2030, the level of service is F. Once we close Churchill, it would still stay F. But if we do implement these mitigations, then we would see an acceptable level of service, which is, as you can see, C on intersection number 3, D on intersection number 4, and D on intersection number 8, which is much better than F. Here are some of the concepts that we have created. This is the near term, considering that we do not make any changes, just with the infrastructure that we have in place today, what could be built out there. And I don't have the pointer, but anyway, we could have the left and right out movement from Embarcadero so that you can make that left turn, signalize them, so it would give you an opportunity to make the left. So this is with your existing infrastructure. This one is long-term solution. We can have a single point interchange kind of thing created where you can have both the on and off ramps come at one single point on Alma, close Embarcadero Road and Kingsley Avenue and make it kind of a private road, cul-de-sac that, so that you can have just right in, right out. There are a couple of homes, so definitely they do need access to those roads, so we cannot just completely close them, but that would help. Also, we were looking into signalizing the intersection of Emerson and Embarcadero. That could be an option. We can work with it. If we feel that that's not a good option, then we can drop that option too. But anyway, so this is a long-term alternative that we were looking into. The next intersection is intersection number 19, El Camino and Embarcadero. It is a CMP intersection operating at level of service F in all the peaks. Not in existing, it is E in existing.
Sorry, CMP means county managed?
The congestion management.
Congestion management program?
Yes. So basically, you're right. It is managed by county.
See,
So
for
on
everyone,
this,
that's
at this
CMP,
particular,
that's what that means.
When you say long-term, when is it, how does that measure? In other words, when you say long-term, how do you, what's the interval between the conditions that get worse, the F- conditions, to
so
the
right
time
now we
when
are
long-term happens?
looking into the year 2030 as long when you so there are two different things. Year 2030 is your long-term year, but if you are talking about the mitigations for long-term, that will depend on how are the funds available and things like that. So I don't have a year. Probably Ed could answer that question, but. So moving on to intersection of El Camino and Embarcadero, we are proposing to install an additional westbound left turn lane as well as northbound right turn lane, and optimizing the signal timings so that it can come back to an acceptable level of service. And you can see the proposed change on the proposed layout at the because the existing layout, map shows what is existing out there, and what we are proposing is shown in the synchro layout that we are showing as proposed layout. And if we do that, then we can get our year 2030 back to an acceptable level of service that is E. It doesn't get really extremely better, but it does get it back to your acceptable level of service. The next one is intersection number 21. Again, a CMP intersection managed by county, working at an unacceptable level of service in year 2030 with the project and without the project. We are proposing to install a westbound right turn lane as well, just the westbound right turn lane from Oregon Expressway going on to El Camino and optimizing the signal timings. And that would reduce the delay at this intersection. It doesn't really make it better, but it does reduce the delay at the intersection and brings it to what the conditions would be in 2030. Intersection of Oregon Expressway and Middlefield. Again, another CMP intersection, does not operate at an acceptable level of service in year 2030 as with or without project. Our mitigation is remove the southbound through right remove southbound through and right lane and install an exclusive right turn lane. Modify the signal phasing to include overlaps. So what I mean by overlaps is your left turn and your right turn can go together without being stopped. So they have a continuous right turn movement rather than stopping and then making the right. And converting northbound right turn lane onto a shared through and right lane, and adding an additional northbound receiving lane. I know it's a lot to.
That's why we sent it early.
Yeah, but but we are here, as I said.
Just to be clear, we didn't see any of this until today.
Oh, okay. There was other stuff. Never mind.
We're seeing this live at places, just to be very clear.
Making decisions today, so. Sorry, my bad.
And we do need to keep in mind that city is continuously looking into, providing infrastructure for other modes of transportation too. And with that, we would see a good amount of mode shift. And with that, it would be possible that some of these mitigations would not be required because you would have more people bicycling or walking for some of their activities, for some of their day-to-day activities.
Okay.
The next one is intersection number 22, on and off ramps with Oregon Expressway. It does not operate at an acceptable level of service in existing as well as in year 2030, whether it's with project or without project. And we did run the peak hour warrants, and it does meet peak hour warrants for signal. So a signal could be installed at these locations. And that is what we are proposing, that we should signalize both the on and off ramps. That way we would have a smooth flow of traffic. And if we do that, then our level of service improves drastically. As you can see, F goes to A and F goes to C on the other intersection. Intersection number 15, this is the intersection of Embarcadero and Cowper. It does operate at an unacceptable level of service. As you can see, there's not a lot of traffic coming from the side street, but because there's a lot of traffic on Embarcadero, they do have difficulty in merging onto Embarcadero, and that's where the delay is, because they do not find enough gaps to merge in. So that is the reason why this intersection is working at an unacceptable level of service. What we are proposing is we can have Cowper just converted into just right in, right out in both northbound and southbound direction. Now, this could be done either for 24 hours or it could be just done for the peak period, because that would help and divert that traffic onto Waverly and add that to the existing volume that we have on Waverly. And because the volume is so low, it really does not impact existing operations at the intersection of Waverly and Embarcadero. And as you can see, if you do that, then again, the level of service at this intersection would get better. From an unacceptable level of service of F, it does operate at an acceptable level of service B. And when you look at the intersection number 16, which is Embarcadero and Waverly, it does not impact that intersection. So the traffic that we add to Waverly is so minor that you won't even notice it. Yes.
We're almost done. Is there a question specifically on that? Because I'll let you go first. Okay.
We also conducted the tire analysis. We did speak about this when we were actually at the onset of the study, that we would do a traffic infusion analysis going through the residential streets. And we did find that Emerson Street between Channing and Edison and Emerson Street between Lincoln and Kingsley would trip. And I think the other mitigations that we are proposing of signalizing some of these intersections would help with that. Not only that, city would look into adding some traffic calming measures from the the toolbox that we had submitted last time, and we could implement those at these two locations. And just kind of a map showing where these two locations are. And this is just a summary of all the mitigations that we spoke about this evening.
Okay, I've got Tony going first. I see Dave, and I am going to hit the technical bell at a certain point because we will have these folks stay after where you guys can have a conversation and really dig deep. But we do have several more items. So go ahead, Tony.
So question about, can you put them into buckets, like if you close Churchill, then you have to do these for mitigation, and how much does it cost? Meaning, so we can make a decision on whether a yes or no on each intersection, knowing what the impacts are and what the mitigations are and how much they cost.
Yes, we'll definitely do that, but all these mitigations are necessary with the closure of Churchill because yes, because out of the 30 intersections that we analyzed, these were the 8 intersections that were impacted.
So is this like a $500 million project or?
No.
Etty, how much?
Every intersection costs around.
Oh, go ahead, Ruta.
Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, it's not a $500 million mitigation.
Right.
We'll be running the cost estimates, but we haven't done that yet. So, but this is not on the order of magnitude of the grade separation where we're talking 250 million. We're talking level of order of magnitude less, but we'll be coming up with a cost estimate.
So it's in the 100 million?
No, 10,
No.
maybe 10-ish? 10-ish?
Yeah.
5-ish?
5-ish?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, unless we go for that single point interchange that we were talking about, that's
There's a
way
lot of
more.
signals and paint.
more than $10 million with it, so yeah.
Yeah.
Signal. Buildings and highways are completely different kind of costs, but we will be running the cost estimate. So, but we're just not
Yeah.
prepared to talk.
500,
It's not that much,
Close to
yeah.
5, maybe 10, something like that. We'll get back to you.
Probably 5.
Okay. Okay. Other questions? I had Dave. I think I had somebody else. I see Megan. I see Nadia. I see the audience.
My question is, did you look at the lights over at Town and Country, the one ped bike crossing and the one at Town and Country when we were doing this study?
That, yeah. It was not in our.
No.
It
they
was
did
not in our, no, yeah. Those were not in the list of the
If you're
intersections.
passing by there this afternoon or this evening, be careful because we're doing special enforcement. We are doing focused enforcement in response to requests from the school district. Seriously, we are.
No speeding.
Or no red light running.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Could we study that as part of the mitigation, if we could do something to those lights there?
Ed, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I think we've been looking at that as a near-term operational issue, and ultimately depending on what happens at Embarcadero. So there was the most ambitious kind of reconfiguration that was shown. That if something like that were to be pursued, that additional pedestrian bicycle circulation would be looked at as a part of that project as well.
Ed,
Nadia?
on that item specifically, and then I'd happy to let other people go, but on that item specifically, one of the ideas that we had heard about was during rush hour, the backup of people that's turning who are southbound El Camino turning left on Embarcadero, stack up meeting the people that are trying to get into Town and Country. And so if there was a light at where the Opportunity Center is to let people turn into PAMF and Town and Country there, where there isn't currently a light, that would help prevent the stacking of the cars in that other section. And so even though it seems far from Embarcadero, that backup really does impact the throughput of the underpass. And that I guess when Palo Alto Medical Foundation was built, they fought hard to get their light at the main entrance. But actually that side alley is both an entrance to the main parking lot and the Caltrain lot, and also the entrance to Town and Country. It's not the most beautiful side. The Town and Country might not like it, but it is where the valet parking guy is. So it just might be a better way to get in, but it helps people not be able to do that thing where they try to get in Town and Country there and it backs up.
Nadia, I think that also could be taken care of by looking at the signal timings and making sure that Caltrans intersection is coordinated with the city intersection, because sometimes when those times are not coordinated, you would see these kind of backups. But if they are, and they move in that right direction, then you would probably see that there will be an improvement.
Okay, Nadia, you also had your hand up.
Yeah,
so why don't we go there? I've still got a whole bunch of people before I go to the audience, so just know that, ma'am.
Yep.
I will get to you.
So one of the alternatives that you looked at over the Embarcadero underpass, where you looked at putting lights at both Kingsley and Lincoln, yeah, if we could pull up that picture, that would really help. That's actually right where Alma narrows. If you're
Yes.
coming on Alma into downtown, it narrows right over the grade step.
That is
and so
correct.
the question is, cars get caught there, because when the signal timing is off and people are slow and stuck in traffic, my worry is that they would get stuck in those two things and now block your new lights. So it would just be, it would obviously all have to be timed, but I would just point out that that is a point where lots of cars back up already.
Right, and we did see that, and we are actually proposing that second lane be at least extended all the way to Lincoln. That way, you have a smooth transition and merging in.
The other thing, and we talked about this the last time, is the zones of traffic. So in the meeting with Supervisor Chavez, she came up with a creative idea, at least I thought. She said in the future, all cars will have, the toll by plate thing, and maybe a way to raise money in the future is to toll everybody who goes under and over a grade separation at all times, pennies on the dollar. But if everyone who had to use the grade separation had to pay for it, I'm not saying that's what she's promoting. But I will say that understanding the zones of traffic in your traffic model will help us understand what the impact of Stanford and where the traffic is coming from, right? And like what areas of the city. So when we think about mitigations, that would help. The last thing is, and I guess maybe it's a question again for our city manager, have we thought about taking back El Camino to be able to handle the traffic lights ourselves? Because I know that coordinating with Caltrans is like also negotiating peace in the Middle East. And I would like to be able to, it just seems like it's such a large swath. And I know that there's precedent because City of San Jose actually took back their control of El Camino around Monterey Highway because it related to some of their high-speed rail stuff down there. I'm sure it would be a cost, but I wonder if it would end up being a cost savings just from all the other stuff we have to do because we can't get along with their traffic signals.
There are some dollars that get traded as a part of that relinquishment, but I don't know that we've looked at it recently.
Okay, Phil, and I'm sorry, Megan has the floor, and Phil, excuse me, I'm sorry, Megan has the floor, and then you. My bad.
Thanks. I had a couple questions about, so back on, well, the slides don't have numbers, but there was one about like unacceptable intersections at an unacceptable loss of service, and then we talked a lot about mitigations to those intersections, and then towards the end there's a tire analysis and how there's some issues on Emerson. So how does the tire analysis fit into the things that need to be mitigated, since we haven't actually proposed any mitigations for Emerson or any of the other tire analysis segments?
So like I had mentioned, that if we do put these two intersections in, then that would take some load off of Emerson because you want to keep the traffic on Alma and on Embarcadero. So we still have to look into that, and we still have to propose what are the other mitigations that we can implement on Emerson for those two blocks which are residential, because as you know, the other blocks are commercial.
Right,
Okay,
so
Paula?
the idea being that the light would like induce
Help.
less traffic?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, Phil.
Was it in scope or not, or did you consider and reject the idea of widening Embarcadero underpass?
We have not.
This is the long-term option, what we are showing over here, or it's a concept. The line on the top, basically, once we close this roadway and assign it as a private roadway, it gives you an opportunity to have a bicycle and a pedestrian path going underneath Alma and taking away from the existing structure, and that would allow you or give you a room to modify the structure and add the fourth lane under the bridge. But as Ruth has said, it's a very costly alternative, and it can be a long term that would have to be planned, and funding would have to be sought for.
Thank you.
Okay, how about our public people? If you want to ask questions, let's line you up and move you right along. Go ahead, line up by where Nyan's standing, because we need you to be in the microphones, because this is all being taped.
While they're coming to the
Yeah.
table, can I ask, Nyan, did you guys consider a traffic circle at that Embarcadero area? So kind of reconfiguring that whole thing in some way where you might be able to figure out some kind of, I know it would be the weirdest traffic circle and probably more like an ellipses and not a circle, and I'm not a geometry person, but.
The only reason we didn't look into the traffic circle or a roundabout at that in this area because of the right of way take, what we might have to do, take it. Even if we consider at the single point on Alma, we would have to widen that structure completely in order, with the right of way, what we will require.
Okay, let's move to the public, and then we need to move on because we do have several more items. We still need to talk about the ped bike crossing alternatives at Churchill. We need to talk about the citywide tunnel, and we need to get you guys to vote the ballots. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Tom Kellerman. I have just a couple of quick questions for the traffic consultants. The report that was delivered on the intersection, there's a lot of data, so I can't, and it doesn't have page numbers, but on the intersection of Emerson and Embarcadero for the HCM analysis says that the intersection sign configuration not allowed in HCM analysis. I don't really know what that means, but it suggests that you weren't really able to do the same level of analysis that you were at some of the other intersections. Is that accurate?
That's an excellent observation. Unfortunately, the way in the country highway capacity, everyone uses for calculating the delay using the highway capacity manual. Whenever you exceed a certain number of lanes at a stop control, there are no methodology or criteria that can evaluate the delay at those particular locations. And unfortunately, that intersection is one of them.
Right. So I guess the takeaway from that is that it might be a highly impacted intersection, but we aren't able to analyze it because of the basis that you utilize. That doesn't mean it's not impacted, it just means you're not able to analyze
Hey,
it.
Nadia, you could maybe sit with Greg and that'll make us more efficient. Use that microphone. Or take Peter's seat, or thank you, Greg. And you gotta turn it on. Okay.
Thanks. Well, that's a good concern and good observation. I'm going to say it, but we can definitely provide you the amount of traffic that's going to be diverted to that particular intersection, and we can go back and compare to the other intersections which have been impacted and give you an idea that what type of delay in percent there might be an increase based on the diverted traffic to that particular intersection.
Right. That'd be great. The other related question is, you do show mitigation and an impact on that particular block, which is the Lincoln to Kingsley on Emerson. And you say that that would be lessened perhaps by the other mitigations, although it's not very clear to me why that is. So for example, the mitigation at the corner of Alma and Lincoln is to prohibit, at least in the short term, prohibit a left-hand turn. But the left-hand turn would have absolutely no impact for the Emerson Embarcadero intersection, which is really going a completely different direction. So presumably the mitigation you're talking about actually, as I see it, would not have any impact at all on that intersection.
So you bring a good point. What we meant with the mitigation measure, let's say just to give an example, the traffic congestion, what we have it under existing condition on Alma. Because of that, there might be a traffic which is diverting onto parallel routes or trying to find other routes. Once you put a traffic signals on Alma and improve the traffic operations, the traffic under existing without the project, which might be getting into the parallel routes, they might move to Alma, and that might reduce the impacts because of your existing demands are going to go down. So when you add on your lower existing demand a certain amount of traffic, it's not going to trip those thresholds where you can call a significant impact.
That's fine, and we can talk more offline.
Sure. They'll stay after,
Sure.
and so
We can definitely do that.
I got to go through these public people, and I really do. I have several more items. So I'm going to ask our public to make comments, and if there's more of the back and forth, if you can stay and have these more detailed conversations, I think that will be more satisfying for everybody. Yes, ma'am.
Just Barbara Hazlett, just a really quick basic question. What was your underlying assumption about traffic increases by 2030? Because I find it highly unbelievable that all of these intersections are going to be improved by 2030. So what was the underlying assumption about your traffic increases? Twofold, threefold, fivefold? Thank you.
So the increase in traffic is based on the travel demand model that we have. So there is a percentage growth that we consider per year to get to the 2030 numbers. So the 2030 numbers that we have analyzed is based on that travel demand model.
What is that number?
It's a percentage. So
What's the percentage?
per year percentage, I would have to get back to you on that. But it is somewhere around a person to person quarter.
25% increase per year.
1%. 1% increase per year, yeah.
Have you heard about SB 50 and what's going to happen to Palo Alto?
We can definitely talk about that after this meeting, but we need to remember that there is something called a gateway. So the traffic, what's going to enter onto your street is depending on where they are entering into those roadways. If the funnel is full or if the pot is full, the demand can be whatever you want. It's never going to make it to a certain part of the city. It's going to be, we call it in traffic engineering, a latent demand. And what it happens, your peak hour gets spread out from 1 hour to 1.5 hours or 2 hours. And that's a reality. No one is going to believe or no one is going to agree until you get into the technical details about it. Thank you.
Okay, next.
Rob Levitsky, 1200 Emerson. I'm glad that you brought your analysis because when I did my traffic counts, I got about the same number, 400 cars in each direction at peak time crossing Churchill, and they need to go somewhere. They're going to Embarcadero, they're going to go to Oregon. You've identified 13 intersections where the level of service drops even further. And the question is, why would you want to do this? Right now, there's 10 trains per hour, and it's not a traffic issue at this point for you. It's a question of why would we do this to our city? Right now we have a maximum of 10 trains per hour, that's 5 in each direction. And that turns out to be 7.5 minutes of gate down time. And that leaves 52.5 minutes of time for people to cross the road, even at the worst case. If we go to 12 trains per hour, which is another train in each direction, then we go to 9 minutes. Gate down time, 51 minutes for people to cross the tracks, even at the worst time of day, which is 7 to 9 a.m. and 5 to 7 p.m. Other times during the day, like noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, there is 1 train in direction per hour. Gate time down, 90 seconds. Available time to cross the tracks, 58.5 minutes. So we would cause 13 intersections to be impacted, all these changes to Embarcadero, changes to Oregon for a problem that probably doesn't really exist yet. Maybe in the future when there's 20 trains in each direction or 10 in each direction per hour that we might have the problem, but I don't see ripping apart Churchill at this time. And I would say to Ed, one of the things we could do is a simple simulation of simulating 12 trains per hour by having the gates come down twice more during a high traffic time and see what the really effect is on the neighborhood. In terms of suicide or people getting run over, yes, if there's more trains, you have more opportunity to get hit by a car, or by a train, but that's about the extent of it. Thank you.
Okay, Gary?
Gary Lindgren, got a question on the concept for long-term. It looks like you have 4 lanes going underneath the overpass at Elma there, but only 3 on top. Why just 3 on top?
Oh, like the on Alma, right?
Yeah, on Elma.
3 on top and 4 underneath.
Yeah.
So that's a widening what I mentioned about, that once you take the bike and the pedestrian path underneath the bridge, it gives you room to widen Embarcadero and add the fourth lane. And
But
this
that means
one-
that you have to do a whole new overpass. You're gonna have to do the whole thing over again.
There might be a way you can work it out. You
I
can
mean,
use the existing structure and still try to manage to get it done.
I mean,
Okay,
that's
we'll
solid.
let Etty weigh in. So
So-
you guys got traffic guys talking
Yeah,
about
so-
construction projects.
Yeah. Anyhow, this is just a concept at this point. Gary, we'd have to look at, you know, what that impact would be to the whole overall structure in itself. What his concept here is to take the bike lane and that maybe you modify the abutment and then you can gain a lane, but we'd have to, you know, actually look in to see if it's viability from a construction and structural issue. But that aside, this is just looking at the number of lanes and how that is mitigated. So from a traffic solution. But thank you, that's a good observation.
Stuart Hanson, Duveneck, just a quick question. Are you planning to do another study like this with Palo Alto Avenue closed to see what happens to traffic on Embarcadero and so on?
So City Council took an action, when was that? January, that the Palo Alto will be included in the downtown, overall downtown plan. So it's no longer part of our scope at this point in time.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, we'll see what the result of that is.
Okay, anybody else from the public? Okay, I'm gonna call time on this. Maybe we'll save enough time, we can get these other CAP meeting, or I'm just gonna have to move you off because I wanna make sure you see the new video and get a chance to look at that and get some homework assignments there. And we really wanna go through the Churchill bike ped options because we have not done that yet. So
Put in some money on that one.
okay.
You're giving us homework for our last meeting. That's what we're joking.
Yeah, well, you can come on Monday and talk about it with the council.
So,
Well, no, you can really email back to us, is really
There's
how
a
we'll
glare.
take
There
it,
we
just
go.
to make sure that if there's something we can change before the community meeting is really what we want to get your feedback on. Okay, so,
we only have 25 minutes to try and get through these last two alternatives. I'm gonna go through the citywide tunnel fairly quickly because we saw.
everybody, citywide tunnel fairly quickly.
Because, because we really did go through half of it at the last CAP meeting. And we really want to get to the bike ped solutions at Churchill, which you have not seen. So, and again, this will be posted. You guys actually have a hard copy of the presentation. The next slide here is really about the criteria. Go ahead. And I'm not going to go over this because it's a lot of bullets, but this is the criteria used for the tunnels. Next. This is just a plan view, which you actually see in the video. North is to the left and south is to the right. The red indicates where we have to build shoe flies for the north portal and the south portal that we actually have to build in order to get the tunnel boring machine in an actual bore from those locations that will go underneath the California Avenue station. These are just some cross sections. This is the twin bore kind of cross section based on the criteria. Go ahead. This is the cross section as we're launching into the portal. This is the south portal, same cross section. And then the next one is this is the trench section as you're getting to the portal. And then this is the cross section of the tunnel itself in. At California Avenue Station. And now we'll just go through the video, and I'll just try and narrate a little bit about the video, but there's a lot of text here, so it's kind of. Can you click down?
Just click.
There you go. And you've seen portion of this already, as again, the north portal was presented at the last CAP meeting, and this is kind of a video of the entire tunnel. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to relocate utilities, get the property acquisitions, construct the temporary shoe fly tracks, and then you construct the portal. Whether you start from the north end or the south end, it doesn't really matter. You're still constructing a portal and getting your tunnel boring machine in here. And so we're going to fly into the north portal. Excuse me, I can't. First thing is remove vegetation, acquire the property, relocate the utilities. Once that's done, and we have quite a few utilities within Alma. The different colors here are full takes versus partial takes. You would also then close the streets that are accessing onto Alma, which here we have Lincoln, Kinsley. And then once you have that, you would close Alma Street because the Alma Street would actually be the place where we actually place the temporary shoe fly, which we would construct. And once you have the temporary shoe fly constructed, you move the Caltrain trains onto that, and now you can actually build the trench section that allows you to actually get your and this also, as I pointed out here, is it requires a complete reconfiguration of Embarcadero because by the time we hit Embarcadero, we're only in a trench, so we would have to probably put Embarcadero in an overhead structure above the trench section. You can continue to build this trench section. By the time you get to just about where Churchill is, you'll be at the portal, and there you can actually start your tunnel boring machines. You'll have this, in this case, we're looking at a twin bore, so you'll have 2 tunnel boring machines, or you can do 1 tunnel boring machine at a time. And then you start your bore, and you actually start to then descend into a tunnel structure. And based on the criteria that we had on the previous slide is, that at the portal we're about 100 feet wide and about, I already lost 50 feet deep. Now we're constructing, construction is below grade. Again, I didn't point out is the Stanford station, game day station is not and cannot be rebuilt in this configuration. We're below grade. Get to California Avenue, we would have to then reconstruct this entire station to a below grade station. It would be, what's our depth here?
Roughly around 60 feet.
We're about 60 feet deep, so just think of all the vertical circulation that we have to build into for a train station that's below grade. You could use a mining technique like they're using in San Francisco for the Muni Chinatown, but still it is a complicated construction and keeping an above-ground station operational while you're building a below-ground station. The tunnels continue until we have, again, we're continuing, this is where we're getting to the south portal. And we do have some property acquisitions in the south section as well. And we would also have to deal with the creek crossing because at this location we're in trench. Again, the same issues we had with the Charleston Meadow are the same here because of that creek crossing right there, which would involve some kind of modification, a lift station or something to get the water beyond the trench. And again, we could start the tunnel either in the south end or the north end or the south end. In if case we're starting from the north, basically here would be the tunnel boring machine extraction. And then after we've pulled the boring machine out, we can actually come in and do some trench cover until you meet the vertical clearance. So, and again, similarly on the north portal, you come back in with a roof structure as far as you can to get get you back some of Alma Lane here, and this would be the final configuration we'd envision for Alma. But Alma would be 1 lane in each direction at the north portal. And again, pointing out we'd have to reconstruct Embarcadero in its entirety, and we didn't really look at what that would look like. So that's the tunnel. We have about 20 minutes left, so if we have a couple short questions, because we
Very short. I don't even really want to talk about it. Can we point out the matrix?
Just
This
quickly.
is the quote-unquote homework. If you guys, so you've seen this a bunch of times, these next 2 slides. We need you to check them out, and if you have problems with any of this, let us know. They're in your packet. You could even do it right now. Anything else? Clarifying question.
There was a comment when someone saw that video on why didn't you recapture part of that acquired property on the north side to make Alma 2 lanes again? So you might want to talk about that, or it may come up.
Okay, that's a good point. Again, you could recapture it to make Alma, or you could look at that property to be, revert back to residential or whatever it was in the after condition of the project, so.
Okay.
So, sorry, will we see anything about the South Palo Alto Tunnel? Is there any plan to study that? Because the council added that option.
Yeah, that's part of the discussion on Monday, right? It's not in our scope yet.
Potentially April scope
Okay.
adjustment. Good clarifying question. Anything else? Clarifying question.
Question and comment. So one, in terms of the matrix, one potential option would be that you could now reconnect California Avenue because it would be in a tunnel and you could cross across the tracks. So just people will point that out as a positive. You might want to throw it in your positives list. I did have a question that I was asked and I wanted clarification on. In the viaduct options that you guys have presented, you show the viaduct moving, that you could construct it within the right-of-way and keeping Caltrain on the current tracks. There was a question about, has Caltrain, they're always trying to straighten things, and that would create a curve. And so has that been, is that another design exception that we would need? Or was that approved by Caltrain?
So
Do you have an answer? We haven't brought that forward to the Caltrains yet.
For the what, the 2%?
No, she's talking about the relocation of the viaduct.
She's talking about using the existing lane and then the shoe fly. We don't have a shoe fly when we do the viaduct.
Correct. Sorry. So we did a quick look at that not for the tunnel, but for the Charleston Meadow Trench. It does appear to be viable, but it does create some additional curvature, and that has not been brought forward to Caltrans because Caltrain. God, I just did that. But it does create because you're looking at your shoe fly is no longer at what's our shoe fly design speed at 50?
No,
79. But then our ultimate design speed, because of the criteria for the electrification, is 110. So the geometry makes it much longer.
So I guess my real question is, though, your viaduct option does the same thing, and isn't that introducing a curve? And has Caltrain written off on that?
We are following the curve criteria for Caltrain design criteria. But we still have to make sure, we'd have to present these to Caltrain to make sure they buy off on. So on the viaduct, our design exception is the profile at 1.4%, correct? So everything else in that viaduct design, it meets criteria, so it doesn't require a variance. And I don't recall what we did just a back of the napkin kind of thing for the trench, so.
I'll just make the point that generally Caltrain and High Speed Rail are both trying to straighten and take out as many curves as possible. Specifically, there's one at the Palo Alto Avenue station. So while I think the viaduct idea of moving it away from the homes might be attractive, certainly to the people on the west side of the tracks, from a Caltrain operational perspective, they may, even though it's not a design exception that you might need, they might operationally be like, could you keep that straight? So just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, I'm going to move us on to Churchill Ped Bike Crossing. We're not taking public comment at the moment.
Question
Wayne?
on the chart. On that chart on page 57, it has order of magnitude cost of 2.5 billion to 3.8 billion, both significant numbers. And can you just capsulize what is the difference between the ranges? It's about 100%.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this on 15%.
You need to have your light on.
You need to have your light on.
Sorry. We do this on 15% level plans, so we do have some pretty high contingencies. So usually it's a variation of that, which is coming in that variation in the number.
Okay, I'm moving us on to Churchill Ped Bike, and then we'll see if we have time for additional public comment. All right, go ahead. Thank you, Hugh.
You can stand up there if you want.
So your assignment is to, if you would, double check the matrices, and if you have any wordsmithing or any thoughts, thank you very much for the comments you already gave us.
Yeah, and why they're setting up, I mean, a lot of those things you see in the video are more quantified in that chart. So you'll see things like what the almost street closure is, what the lane reductions are, and things like that. So they're kind of tabulated there for you in one spot.
Okay, Hugh, you're on.
Okay. And I haven't seen these slides ahead of time, so that is the order of them. So
that was a dirty little secret.
I've
Yeah,
seen
but
them all, just not sure what
plan
order.
view and renderings,
Okay,
that's
cool,
all you got.
great. All right, that's good to know. Thank you. So and I know we talked about this with this group last time we were here, and you've seen some elements of this at a high level. This is a little bit more sort of detailed level to show what two options are. If you do close the Churchill crossing for vehicles, how do you maintain a bicycle pedestrian access through this? So we have two options. This option kind of gives you a sense of what if we did it just on kind of the west side of Alma, so really just going under the tracks alone. And you can see the yellow there is a ramp going down to the crossing that's over here. And then there would be some access, obviously. There's a lot of opportunity to figure out what you do on the kind of school side of Churchill, because you'd have a lot of room there, not a lot of access, no access, in fact, to driveways in that short block. And then, you'd have to also figure that sort of big blue box is kind of a location where you have some kind of plaza or entranceway into that tunnel area. I went too fast. Oh, you're doing it. We're both doing it. Sorry, I have a keyboard.
I don't, yeah.
I have power. You have power too. So this is a rendering of what that kind of roughly would look like with this. You're looking at Alma Street, obviously the sports field and the train there, and you can see kind of the undercrossing going under there and coming back up adjacent to the Embarcadero bike path that's on right next to it there. So I think a number of things to work out, probably about the details about how it connects up, but gives you a sense of what it looks like. Okay, yeah. I was watching Elliot to see if he was going too. So then, and then this is another rendering kind of looking, down the tracks. So again, you can see the two ramps going down on either side of the tracks that give you access. And again, don't get too caught up in exactly how that access looks. The point is you have a plaza for access, you have, some type of plaza or access on the other side.
How long is that ramp?
How long is the ramp?
Yeah, the ramps are about 200 to 250 feet, and the undercrossing is about 45 feet long.
Thanks, B.
250 feet long?
Yeah, the ramps coming down are about 250 feet, and then the undercrossing itself is about 45 feet.
And the
Have you looked at whether people will use it or not? I mean,
I'm not sure what you
So
mean
can we
by
get
that.
through all this and then we can have a
Yeah,
conversation?
when we come back to
Because
that.
I really want to get this
It's a good
done.
question. Yeah. And then, so this is just a final rendering again from the side, on the school side, just to give you a sense of option one, and a rendering. Then there would also be a stair access right along, so you can see as you bring that, the Embarcadero bike path kind of comes along parallel to Caltrain there, you'd have another access point which you could fit in there and, provides direct access to people walking on that path.
Here, just a little note to self, we're showing just standard Caltrain fencing along the right-of-way, and the reality is it would definitely be wrought iron or something much more upgraded than
Thank
that.
you, Ed.
Gold-plated.
Thank you, Ed. I was
Swarovski
going to ask that.
crystals.
What about the fencing? Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
We spend a lot of time on fencing.
absolutely. Makes a lot of sense.
We'll make that a note.
More and more renderings.
Very important.
And then this is again a view sort of along Alma Street from that sort of plaza going down onto the ramp. To give you a sense of that, again, the fencing. But yeah, important just to understand the appropriate kind of height and, dimension for that fencing.
Ed, do you see us having the wing?
We'll do whatever.
Okay. Yeah, 13-inch winglet is what we've had in the past.
So the second option that we talked about as part of this is an option that crosses both Alma and the Caltrain tracks. And we kind of went back and forth and looked at some ways to do this. But as you can see, the basic concept is that you have a tunnel or a ramp down that will start in the middle of Churchill on the eastern side of Alma Street, so east of there, and then again kind of come out on the far side by the school and kind of bend and kind of put you in in the general area of where you can maybe get access up to the existing path, or we need to figure that out a little bit. And we've done a little bit of thinking about how do you make access to that central tunnel, which is of course atypical, and you probably will all be aware of that, so that it can be done in as safe of a manner as possible. Now, this is not a high traffic street necessarily, especially at this point where you no longer can go through. So, there's some room to be potentially creative here. The other thing to note, of course, is that you do lose parking for the length of that tunnel and a little bit beyond to enable to fit the tunnel in, basically. And then so some renderings of that image. You can see we've got a little raised crossing right in front of the tunnel. So really we bring vehicles down and slow them as they approach or leave the area of the crossing, which I think is probably pretty important because we'll have people walking along those sidewalks coming across to the ramp in that location. Here's an image of somebody who would be biking down into the tunnel and then back out potentially to the other side. There actually are houses a lot closer than that, but you get the general idea. And then on the far side, you have this opportunity, to bring, again, some stairs because you have a lot more space. So you can kind of bring people out to the street there more directly if they're trying to access locations that aren't at the far end of that ramp, and you can kind of see the ramp there as well. Oh, you guys are pushing me along. This is just a very sensitive keyboard.
I would love to.
Yeah, okay, and there you go.
Eileen mentally controlled.
Yeah, I did. That was my mind count.
Is that what it was? You
Yeah,
got my fingers? It's just a heavy hand, maybe. So these are, this is kind of summary two hands. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, just similar to what we did on the Meadow Charleston. We have, two options that we're looking at here. So we're just kind of using that color code. I mean, obviously some of the big differences are you cross Alma at one versus the other. And you do get, some benefit from that. So one will be a little longer to construct because it's longer, more expensive, et cetera. But there are some distinguishing factors between those.
And then there's another one too.
Yeah, that one is more just the engineering factors that we've talked about before. I mean, all of these would be, orange to red because they're all impacts. But generally, because we would be crossing Alma, the utility relocations would be more for option 2. But generally, and you do have some impacts during construction to potentially the path along high school and things like that. But there's no design exceptions or anything related to these.
I'm going to start with Tony because he had the floor when I moved us along. Not yet.
So I'm just wondering if you've looked at other alternatives, such as the Homer Tunnel costs about $6 million at that time, and the tracks are about 2 feet higher than they are at Churchill, but it was easier to get under it.
Right, and we had, before when we were here at the previous CAP meeting, we kind of said those were like variations. We did call them like options 3 and 4, where we could change the elevation of the railroad tracks, but obviously that's more expensive. So that could obviously be something we could consider for either one of these alternatives as a variation down the road.
Okay, I have another question. If we had to consider a roundabout at Embarcadero and Alma, what's the radius of that roundabout for 2 lanes? Do you have that off the top?
Yeah, I don't have that off the top of my head, no.
Okay, Nadia, and I think Phil's got a hand up. I see both Megan and Dave.
So in both the concepts, like my general thing is kids are impatient, kids on bikes, more impatient. And so like on option 1, and I'm going to have to point, on option 1, you kind of go down, go under the tracks. I almost wish, I know it makes the impact zone larger, but I almost wish that the ramp points towards Palo, which is actually where all the bikes are going, because you're making the kids double back and then have to get on the road and then double back again to go towards Palo. And let's face it, they're all going towards Palo. Now, do they go towards Palo down Churchill, or are they going towards Palo towards some back entrance? I don't know the bike movements well enough. Like, I don't know if they're coming in on 25 Churchill, or are they going through the other part and getting in closer to El Camino, to Town and Country. So that is a kind of, and this sort of the same comment on option 2, when you're coming up on the other side, does it make sense? Are they all coming up the back and going into 25 Churchill, like on the back side there, or do they go in through the other side? I don't know.
Yeah. I think what we know is what the counts and the numbers are, and it's not a number of kids use this crossing, not just Palo kids,
But
is
is-
the understanding. But for those kids, I understand your question. Would they be better served by either adding a ramp that went the other direction or?
Because in your first option, I envision kids, since the stairs point towards the other back part of Pali, like I envision kids
Right.
trying to pull that bike up the
Sure.
stairs and creating a more hazardous condition,
Sure.
right? And so I don't know if we have a traffic camera there already, because it is one of our most dangerous crossings, and I know it's got money for
Camera, yeah.
upgrades and
No,
stuff.
It's only on Meadow.
Okay.
Oh, a bike rail?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could consider a wide enough stair. I mean, it would, in this alternative, presumably, you would think it would probably be feasible to run a ramp the other direction also.
Right.
Now, that's, I'm not
Right.
gonna say that you should do that.
Right into Pali, which is good, right? I mean, it doesn't,
Yeah.
you don't have to cross the traffic on this side, you only have to do it on the other side.
Okay, Phil, and then I've got Megan and Dave.
You don't show the overhead catenary or the supporting structures, and I was wondering whether the supporting columns for the catenary might impinge on those paths, which might narrow them down, or some issue like that.
Since we don't know where the foundations for those overhead catenaries are, we'd have to then work that through. The overhead catenary poles, I believe, are being spaced about 200 feet apart last time I talked to Caltrain. So it's something that we could work through depending on where those poles are. So, but we don't know exactly where those poles are. So this is, again, concept, those would be like, details that would be worked out if whatever concept goes forward would be. And I think I wanted to answer, there was a question, I think from Tony about the length of ramp, and all these ramps are designed to meet ADA standards, and so because of that however deep you're going, is equal to how long you have to run the ramp, so.
Okay, Megan.
Thanks. Do you have any information about sort of bike pedestrian turning movements? It's relates to what Nadia is saying, but could we get that information? Because I am a Homer Avenue tunnel underpass user on a daily basis, and the oblique angles make it very unsafe, in my personal opinion, to the pedestrians and the bicycles cross each other at exactly the same moment. And it makes it very unsafe. And so I would not want to create a similar situation here where you have these pedestrians walking down this little thing, and then there's a bike zooming up out of the tunnel, and boom. So can we add some considerations or get some information about where these bikes are going? Are they going to Pali? Are they going straight out Churchill? How are we going to disconnect the pedestrians from the bikes or slow them down so that the crossings are safe?
Okay, David.
Good point.
I was curious about how wide option 2 was, and how does that compare to the California Ave pedestrian bike ramp?
Yeah, you take that one. Good.
Yeah, California, I think it's around 8 feet wide, and this one is shown to be 10 feet. And mainly, the main constraint is just the width of Churchill to avoid, widening Churchill on this one.
Oh, and then how wide is the option 1 then, the ramps?
We can make it really as wide as we'd like, but it's shown as 20 feet. There's more flexibility on option 1.
You like that? Yeah. Okay, now I want to move us to the poll. Thank you. It's a poll. You can participate. I was so mad when Carrie left because we had 10 of you here, and that would have been. Oh, she already did. Yay. Okay, so take a moment and please mark your poll, and then turn it in so that we can give the results in a couple seconds when we've got them. And please, fold them. Don't look at your neighbor because we don't want to start any fights.
I'll collect them.
We'll just fold them. Millette will collect them. We'll get them. We wanted to wait because today we've shown you a lot of information and we felt like you needed to have all of this. Yeah, well, it's right up on there. It's there. But we're asking our CAP members. This isn't an audience participation thing, so I'm sorry. So, Tony.
I really don't understand how we're going to choose without knowing how much each of these costs versus how much we can pay.
That's great. You just write that down and hand it in, and now you've told everybody who said that. But
That's clear.
We're good. Some people can make that decision. So we're just taking a temperature. This is not a recommendation to anybody. It was a way for your city management who has to make a a presentation next week to kind of know where your thoughts might be as a group. And so we just want to this is fun. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to, but if you want to give us some feedback in an anonymous way, we would love to have
Hey,
it.
Eileen, real quick.
Yes.
We actually do show the cost for option 1 and 2. We skipped over that slide pretty quick, but if you want to go back, maybe a few
Yeah, I
slides
mean,
over
they're
to
on the
show.
matrices. You've got costs of a lot of these things. You've
Yeah,
got
yeah.
the cost of for the
Oh, I
ped
didn't
bike,
see
you've
that.
got both of them. You've got Meadow Charleston, you've had them. We've got tunneling.
Cool. Where is it?
We don't necessarily have all the mitigations down, but I think we all kind of know what the order of magnitude is. All right, so now what I want to do, before I take any further action, because it is actually after 6, I do want to make sure that we cover the fact, and several of you have already done your work of getting the word out about our meeting in 2 weeks. Our meeting is in 2 weeks. So what we're talking about at this meeting is right here on the flyer, which is the Churchill Avenue issue that we went through here, and also the citywide tunnel. And so that's what, get your word out to your folks. Now, we will be doing a similar format as always. We'll have people available to talk about other things, but the PowerPoint will really be focused on primarily that. And I believe, are we having Paul there to talk about finance? So we'll have some of that as well. But again, this is, go ahead, Etty, you want to?
So there'll be exhibits of the previous community meetings. So the Churchill, the Charleston Meadow exhibits will be there as a station, as well as any of the other alternatives that have been looked at so far to date as stations. So there'll still be information of other information, but the focus of the PowerPoint will be these 2 items.
Okay, any questions about that? Yeah, Phil.
If somebody from the audience, the public raises a significant issue or concern about one of the South Palo Alto crossing, Charleston Meadow, how much time will you allow that discussion to take place?
Well, again, I think we're going to focus the Q&A on what has been in the PowerPoint, and we've had a previous meeting that covered Charleston and Meadow, and we'll have people available at the engineering tables to take and deep dive, but this is not going to turn into the second meeting on the same stuff. We need to give the people in the other part of the community opportunity to ask questions of our
Yeah.
people.
But the stations, like you've done
Yeah.
in the past, is everyone, the people who are manning the stations will
They
be
know how to
taking notes.
interact
And there'll
with
be
that.
there'll be a what do you call it, a report out at the end of the.
Yep. So, and there'll be ways to leave us comments for sure, and we would encourage that, but we really want to keep the focus on the things that people haven't had as much touch as that area. Yeah, Nadia.
So very specific feedback for the funding. So as we have, and I think Paul left her, but as we have like gross receipts tax, employee payroll tax, square footage tax, there needs to be a column that shows what would that be in Palo Alto. So how many employees do we have? How many square feet do we have? So that somebody could run some rough math and be able to figure out what we're talking about here, because I think the orders of magnitude matter. And just saying San Francisco has $2,000 an average worker, the next obvious question is how many workers does Palo Alto have, right? I mean, so you're going to need to have that data to be able to have that part of the conversation. I think that would be really helpful.
So did somebody get that? Because I'm telling them things. Okay, what I noticed is fascinatingly, you didn't all vote on the same, everybody didn't vote for all 3 topics, which I think is interesting and often happens. So can you summarize that funding thing again, just briefly, Nadia?
Sorry, so Paul talked about a gross receipts tax,
Right.
an employee headcount tax, and then I raised the fact that there's a square footage tax.
Yep,
So when we
yep.
talk about the ones that exist, one slide which shows in Palo Alto, this is how many employers there are, this is how many square feet there are, and how many what gross receipts would mean, so that
Right.
someone could do rough numbers about what that means.
Okay, we've got that, we'll do it. Dave?
I just wanted to confirm either way that were we going to do a presentation on the unclearable queues aspect of traffic lights at this meeting?
Are we going to do unclearable queues as part of the traffic presentation at the meeting in 2 weeks?
It hasn't been done.
Oh, I think what he means is Josh had done a presentation a long time ago about when.
We're not able to confirm what led to his conclusions, so
Okay.
TJCAM is looking closer at it, and at this point, I think it's likely to be a part of our estimate for the contract amendment, rather than something that's currently in scope.
Okay, so no. Yeah. no.
this meeting, the 27th meeting, is after the 18th meeting, where we would be presenting the fact that this South Palo Alto tunnel would be done on 1st April, or decided on 1st April, right?
No.
It's,
doesn't
I think
ma-
you and I should talk
yeah,
offline.
Yeah, doesn't matter. I think the
sequences,
point is that you also, in that same meeting, also have a timeline on when to decide on the various options. So we're not going to decide on when we would start the analysis for South Palo Alto tunnel, but then we're going to decide on what the alternative is on the 24th of April. At least that's what I kind of read from that timetable.
I think we're pointing out the disconnect between the schedule that
Yes.
currently exists and where we are in the narrowing of the options.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
exactly
and I
right.
think that's good
So
advice.
you'll probably.
I think we all get that.
Yeah, so
We're
you'll
trying to
probably,
communicate.
yeah, you'll probably get that on the 27th is my point.
Gotcha.
All right, any other comments on this stuff? I'm getting some QC because I noticed that there was some uneven voting. Did somebody want to make a public comment while we're getting the very last QC? Because I didn't allow that. Okay, so they're all waiting on bated breath about what our results are. Okay, so now, that was this one, so this one's just 7, okay. All right, so the first question, which everyone, we should put that one back, is please select your preferred alternative for the Meadow Charleston. There were 9 people who chose to vote on this, and so that's, as we talked about, somebody has chosen not to vote because of the financial impacts. So the 9 people split 4 for the trench, 3 for the hybrid, 1 for the viaduct, and 1 for the south tunnel. So that adds to 9. So then under please select your preferred option for the Churchill Head bike crossing options, we had 8 people choose to vote. 3 who want option 1 and 5 who want option 2. And then please select your preference for direction and the citywide tunnel should take. 7 of you chose to vote on this. 1 wants to continue to study things, and 6 of you are ready to eliminate it. So, food for thought.
Fascinating.
So,
Had some money on the table.
Yeah.
Can I mention that the mayor recently made a presentation, I think it was in the SB 50 talk he gave.
No, it was actually a state of the city.
I'm sorry, thank you. In which he said that the funding was very problematic for the citywide tunnel. He didn't say don't do it, he just said funding is very problematic, which to me is still a bath of cold water.
Yeah. Okay, does anybody have anything, maybe you should have the closing words, Mr. City Manager, before we adjourn people from their potentially
Yeah, that's
last
right. Well,
meeting.
yes, your last meeting. And again, I'm still taking offering, as the case may be, on whether this will be your last meeting or not. So that said, see you at your next meeting. And if anyone is looking to bail out, please do see me, because I'd like to take the opportunity to try to convince you otherwise.
But also, since we're in Stanford and it's, kind of the nerds, city, happy Pi Day tomorrow.
Yes, happy Pi Day. It's actually on my calendar. And thank you very much. If they do choose to not move forward or not move forward with us, it's been a pleasure to work with all of you and get to know all of you much better. And thank you. And we'll see you on maybe Monday night, some of you. And definitely, I hope you're all able to make it on the 27th. I think it'll be a very interesting meeting. All righty.
It's where it's Mitchell Park. I think it's on the flyer part.
My absence may be noted, but it's